In this video, we'll explore the mechanics of age regression. And before I do so, I want to draw our attention to a curious phenomena that's happened across time that each of us will relate to one degree or another. There's a gang, and the young man, the young woman is seeking to belong to the gang. A hazing or initiation ritual is demanded as sacrifice to facilitate belonging. The gang member is often asked to harm or endanger something valuable to themselves, often something feminine. The gang may require a young man to hand his sister over to be gang raped, or to rob the house, or to beat up his best friend, to in some way dissociate himself from that which is feminine, that which is empathic, that which is heart-centered, that which is in the higher levels of brain functioning. And in doing so, simultaneously, share in a wounding. Avoid the ability to get out of the gang, because it's a process of burning bridges to alliances outside of the gang, by harming the support networks that are outside of the gang. And this is the price of belonging to what is often a very sociopathic sense of clanship, in which the same reenactment of betrayal and abuse will take place to some degree within the gang. If loyalty is doubted by the gang leader, one gang member might be asked to kill their closest connection. That possibly threatens the gang. Meaning, if someone's emotional tie, empathic tie, is close enough to another gang member, that it seems possible that, given the choice, the person would choose to do what's right by their friend rather than to do what they are told by the gang leader, then this loyalty must be tested to continually affirm the primacy of the gang leader, which is often determined by that who is most sociopathic, that which is most cruel, that which is most isolated and willing to exert force and fear. Within a traumatic sociopathic paradigm, the pinnacle of leadership is defined by who is most sociopathic, most ruthless, and thus able to secure and resecure authority on the basis of being able to kill competitors, to demolish competitors financially, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. We watch the new initiate shakily, with a great deal of trepidation, do something that they do not want to do. Participate in a family member's sexual abuse, a theft, a murder, something that severs their ties with the surrounding environment. And the question is, are they at choice? Is this a free choice? Why are they doing what they're doing? We zoom out and look at another example of this phenomena in which decisions seem to get made from a place that is not in the high functioning area of the brain. There's an opportunity for leaving the family system. There's an opportunity for leaving a shitty company. There's an opportunity for leaving a shitty spouse or partner, an abusive spouse or partner. There's an opportunity. And yet, in one way or another, by causing or allowing, as each opportunity presents itself to transcend and leave the system, there is a certain regression. There is a certain unwillingness to step into the new role. There is an opportunity to step into a new identity. And at the last minute, we arrive late, shy, not in a position, mentally, emotionally, financially, that would allow that transition into a new image, a new reality. And instead, we go back to the old reality. We may cling to it, or try and hold on it, but within a matter of time, it slips through our fingers. Zoom out and look at another domain. A lottery winner wins $10 million, $20 million, $100 million. And it seems, based on the mythology of our culture, that their happiness would increase, etc., etc., etc. But 3 years later, they're in debt, and they're more miserable than when they began. We're in relationship, and we want this, and we say we want this, and we talk a good line, and then something happens that triggers a pattern. And suddenly we're fixated and feeling very small, acting very irrationally, it seems. That no matter what we or anyone else does, we refuse to participate in the way that would facilitate evolution, growth, healing, transformation within ourselves and within the relationship. We refuse to budge. We hold the grudge. We refuse to look. We hear all the arguments, and then we do exactly what we were going to do before, untouched. And the reality spirals down. The reality spirals down. Something traumatic happens, and we find ourselves back feeling 2 years old, feeling 3 years old, feeling 4 years old, unable to cope, overwhelmed. And we understand mentally that being stuck in these young feelings and ages is the opposite of what is required for us to respond dynamically to a traumatic event. And yet somehow we cannot let go of the terror or making the decisions out of that terror. And in a certain way find ourselves in a traumatic loop where we refuse to respond as an adult, creating problems which increase our terror of being mature and being responsible, which escalate the problems. And we're stuck in a young age. We want to have a sexual relationship. If we zoom out and zoom in again, things are coming along, and then there's this one thing that happens, and suddenly we can't move our body. We can't move our body. So what's happening in all of these different terrains to one degree or another? What's the mechanism of regression? Now, first of all, one of the better metaphors or paradigms to look at the psyche and the framework of time is rings of a tree. For example, if you cut down a 2,000-year-old redwood, you will be able to count 2,000 rings within the redwood, some bigger, some smaller, depending on the amount of growth that occurred that year. There will be a record of the growth within the redwood. The same is true when you get to the end of a DVD or a record or a CD. You get to the end of the point in time, but there is a record, a spherical record of the past, of all that has been listened to and recorded to date. And if you understand the biology of a tree, the new and present time is where the life is, where the cambion is always in that which is new. The cambion is fragile, protected by some bark, certainly. But right under the bark, there's this very thin, lifelike layer. And if that bit is cut, the tree dies. It does not continue. If the present-day body is cut, the tree dies. But that part of the tree does not provide its structural stability. Its structural stability is the ring-like patterns of now what is called deadwood, but might equally be called the crystallized memory of the dance between that tree and its environment. Because the rings are different if it was a rainy season or a dry season, if there was a forest fire or no forest fire, if there were other trees around it or not. A skilled forensic scientist can understand the environment of that redwood by understanding the record that is kept of that year and comparing that to the records kept by other redwoods in different environments to understand that, when near a stream or in heavy rain, we see this pattern. This pattern is present. Therefore, statistics are highly likely to verify that there was a stream, there was a high rain situation here. In other words, the redwood never grows independent of its environment. There's never a redwood that says, there's an unusually high amount of rain this year. But I think that just to be a little bit different, I'm going to reduce the intake of water in my roots such that I grow less than any other tree around me, just because. Now, there is in many ways an unedited, an unconscious dance with the environment, which is why the environment can be determined by understanding what one is seeing in the tree. The light, the water, the environment can be determined by what's happening in the tree. what's going on in the mother can be correlated by what's going on in the fetus in the womb. The fetus will behave differently if the mother is a crack addict versus on a macrobiotic organic diet. Will behave differently if the mother is on an adrenaline addict, is an adrenaline addict, trying to constantly keep busy and this and that and the other, wondering where things are going to go, than if the mother does yoga and meditates and is in balance in some way in her life. What happens in the environment happens in the tree. What happens in the cult or culture shows up in the individual. Now, the phenomena of regression occurs in two forms. One is fixation or compulsion, and that's where growth stops. And the other is where growth continues and then goes back to a stuck place. Now, if we think of each of our years on the planet as being a ring, as being a distinct age. Now, one could easily break it down into months as well, because that's also true. It's not just the year that is discernible to a knowledgeable forensic scientist. They can determine the seasons, what was going on in the seasons. So we could break it down by year, we could break it down by month, we could break it down by day. Given our limited computing power, breaking it down by year is often far more sophisticated than average. But of course, it's not a year to the psyche. It's what happened today that was significant. What happened tomorrow? What happened in this hour? What happened in this month, in this week, in this year? It's what happened that was significant whenever that happened, at whatever period that occurred. Now, in the healthy flow and the evolution of the psyche through time, you have energy entering the system in the pre-birth, and in many ways it comes from outside the system. Consciousness, awareness, energy in a variety of ways is entering the system at birth. We don't know where all of the energy comes from because we don't have a scientific paradigm within a relatively scientific cult for understanding consciousness. It's called the hard problem because scientists can't figure it out. It's a little bit counterproductive when many of the materialist scientists solve the problem by saying that consciousness doesn't exist. It is an illusion. The problem being, of course, that their theories do not exist then. So their theory that consciousness doesn't exist and is an illusion must be an illusion, which means we shouldn't pay any attention to them, which puts us back to where we began. Energy enters the system in some format with the inception, the beginning of life, and naturally flows through the ages as they unfold, much as the laser starts dancing at the beginning of the movie and starts going through time. And of course, most of the scenes in the movie are not broken down by time, they're broken down by significant scenes. So you don't have every scene the same length in a typical, whether it's a song CD or a DVD. It's this key event where this thing happens is 20 minutes ahead, so you jump to there. And then the next significant thing that happens is 7 minutes ahead, so you jump to there. And so energy flows through the system, radiating out in a spherical pattern as consciousness develops. And the laser beam of the DVD, the zoom-in lens of the conscious mind, is focusing largely on the present. What's going to happen next? You go to the next scene, that's happened next. And if you go back into memory, you rewind and say, oh, that happened here. What's going to happen next? Maybe it's a repeat. And so we have the identification, using the DVD player as an analogy, as the laser beam. I am the one who sees. I am the one who remembers. I am the one who saw this scene turn to this scene. And I am the one who participated. It wasn't just that I watched the scene. I participated in making the scene. I didn't make all the scene, but I was one of the characters, because I've got a body. I've got a laser beam that's watching the whole scene, but then I've got a body that I can move around within the limitations of a set of laws called physics, that I can move around within the scene. So I'm both watching the scene and I'm within the scene. So we have a duality, the experience and the witness of the experience. And the witness is often not bound by the same limitations as the body, and the witness is not bound by the laws of physics. The witness can ask things like, well, why don't I do this? So-and-so did that. There's no physical law stopping this and that, but somehow the body inside the set, inside the scene, can't seem to just become a pop singer if that's the goal, like Whitney Houston. Why does she get to do this and this, but my body won't move in that way? And so, or it sounds like it, but for some reason I don't negotiate record deals, or it's not the right time, or something like that. And so my avatar, so to speak, my body, doesn't fully cooperate. And the body, in many ways, is storing charges, emotional charges, which translate into electrical, biological charges. You know, when you have intense emotions, you start sweating. A whole series of physiological transformations happen based on the intensity and pattern of emotion, which in turn is affected by the intensity and the pattern of thinking, which in turn is affected by the intensity and pattern of visualization, which in turn is affected by the intensity and pattern of sensation. All of these things affect one another on different layerings. So we've got a DVD, so to speak, that has multiple dimensions other than just the height, length, width, and depth. So that even when we watch another movie, we're infusing that movie with the dimensionality of emotions, with the dimensionality of brain chemistry, with the dimensionality of our own memory, and having an engagement with what is otherwise just a series of lineal images and sounds that another species would not be able to understand, but sounds through the memory pattern recognition of language we can understand. So this energy is radiating out. And yet, in this intersection of trauma and age regression, or trauma and freezing, an inability to move on, where energy becomes bound up and locked, fixated. We have a mechanical phenomena, and that's what I want to explore here. So, if you imagine a straight line, and a string, So let's say a straight fishing hook. So we've got a piece of string here tied to the little circle in what would be a fishing hook, but it's not a fishing hook, it's a straight line. Well, it's very easy to pull a straight line through any pattern. There's no places where it gets caught. It just flows out and flows out without getting caught. And it's wonderful. It's so easy. You can pull it through any system. However, when there's no friction whatsoever, when there's no distinction, like it doesn't have a series of gradient barbs on it, little things that mark, exactly how far it's pulled through. When there's no distinctions of any kind, it tends to be relatively unconscious, much like how many breaths did you take today? I wasn't tracking them. We just kind of flow through. Consciousness flows through the unfolding of life. But then there are these certain moments where consciousness stops and becomes fixated. And consciousness is born in those fixated points to some extent. Like we're driving along and then there's a flat tire at a certain point and there's bump, 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 and it's demarcated. This is the point where the car started going bump, bump, bump. This is the point where we paid attention to the outside environment, etc., and we learned about what was going on. But sometimes we get stuck there. There's a catch in the consciousness. But we don't move through. The thread will not go into the needle head and will not pass through. And so we've got stuck. We've got the head in the DVD will not keep turning. The DVD will not keep turning. The laser lens stays focused on that one little dot, even though there's a whole rest of a movie to watch, even though there are millions of new movies to watch. It's fixated on this one point. Can't let go. It's bound up. And if you can imagine that this is a pin, a steel pin, and that here we have a concentric set of steel rings. Strings, steel rings, doesn't matter. But these are mechanical objects in time, objects of time. And that this pin has a little spring, etc. So normally it kind of pivots forward like this, and it can just slide through. It's round on most of its shapes. So it can just slide through time, much like this straight needle. It gets some bumps, so you're aware of it. Bung, 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 but it kind of slides through the inner ages. So when you have a new experience in reality, the consciousness comes in, it gravitates throughout all the ages, comes all the way to the present in a clean and pristine pattern. Now, when the energy comes through in a clean and pristine pattern, what we experience is the pattern of the moment. It's like white light that is not tinted along the line. So it comes in as white light. And when there aren't all these distorting objects along the way, all these hooks and charges and filters and contracts and beliefs, etc., it just hits us and we experience the present moment as a witness with the white light of our source, the white light that comes in the innocence. In the tarot card, it might be called the Fool. The one who has not yet learned the nature of all the limitations, and so is smarter in a certain way in the face of the unknown. The fool is the one that steps off the cliff and finds something there that no one else can see and doesn't fall to their death. They're too innocent to know. In the Nordic stories, where the little waif, the young girl, is sent into the woods and encounters the trolls, she does not understand that she should hate the trolls. She doesn't understand that she should be afraid of the wolf. And so she pulls the thorn out of the wolf's paw, she protects this, she does this, and slowly the creatures of the forest, the reptilian brainstem and its many personas, become the friend, become the ally of the innocent one, of the fool within, the one who doesn't have any enemies, because they don't even... The idea of an enemy is an unnecessary one. There's just an interaction with the present moment. An interaction with the present moment. Without agenda, without fear. There's something very powerful in that. Ability to live in the moment and respond, to be, to a certain extent, the one who sees and responds, that creates something sacred, something beautiful. Receiving the light, coming into the present moment, and responding. And the question is, what's going on when that doesn't happen? When the light is coming in, and it's getting bound up and caught at 4 years old in the terror of the unresolved 4-year-old's trauma. And it never gets to be any older. And so we don't actually experience reality through the light of innocence, the light of source, or the present moment. We respond to the present moment with the filters of the 4-year-old, because the energy is tied up and bound up there. And I'd like to suggest that this little mechanism, which you can kind of see is, if it tilts this way, then this hook does not grab on this ring here. Now, if it maintains this shape, even if it managed to break through, a new trauma or something broke through this line, it would then get caught on the next year and the next year. It's resisting flow. It's resisting flow. And so what are the mechanics that hold this in place? Because the human ego, if you ask the conscious mind, do I want to be stuck feeling 2 years old, 4-year-old? Do I want to be stuck in rage? Of course not. But I am. My attention is locked up. Now there's many interesting correlations and distinctions in this phenomena of energy that gets locked up rather than flow. For example, if you put two batteries together, two 9-volt batteries, and you cross polarity, it creates a lot of heat, but you have no electrical flow back and forth, and the batteries will quickly drain. If you have too much acid in the soil or too much alkaline in the soil, the nutrients that create food for plants get bound up and don't flow. The nutrients get bound up and don't flow. If you have too much acid or too much alkaline, there's a mid-range that releases the energy stored in the soil in a format available for plants. The same is, of course, true with pressure. If the outer environment is too pressurized, then we cannot breathe. If it is too depressurized, we cannot breathe. We have to have a right amount of pressure correlated with the muscles of the lung, or our lungs are destroyed either in a vacuum or in superpressure. And that's what we have, meaning we have a regulated set of lungs, of energy exchange mechanisms, because that's what lungs do. They take certain things out of the body and they bring certain things in the body. And those things that it takes out of the body are nutrients for the surrounding ecology. And those things it takes into the body are nutrients from the surrounding ecology, called oxygen and carbon dioxide and trees and human beings. And there's an energy exchange system. And it relies on the right pressure, the right amount of pressure, or it doesn't work. If the pressure's, you can take a one-way breath, but you can't, if you've inhaled, you can't exhale. Or if you've exhaled, you can't inhale again. And it's stuck, and the body dies. Because there's too much weight. There's too much weight there's too much imbalance put at one point in the system. And so it is unregulated energy out of sync with its ecology that creates fixation, addiction, trauma, stuck energy. And in this case, in the cycle of time, the stuckness is at a certain age, and at, most importantly, a certain emotional age. Because just because you feel 5 years old and terrified and afraid of being punished or hit, etc., it doesn't mean you no longer remember that 9 times 9 is whatever on the multiplication table that you learned after you were 4. It doesn't mean you can't drive your car in a state of terrified shock that the 4 and 5-year-old is feeling inside. So what's happening is the emotional age is regressing. And with it, the physiological age, the body is remembering what it felt like at that younger age, and then is stuck there in that felt emotional state, independent of the ability of the mind to witness or navigate around the issue. It's very much like a semi-driver in a semi-truck carrying a 20-ton load on their semi. If the emotional payload crashes off on the side of the road, they may know what's going on. They may know where they need to go. They may understand that a client is waiting for that delivery. They may understand what the contract is. They understand everything. That's the witness. That's the observer in the ego. But they do not have the ability to load 20 tons of steel back on the semi. That system of energy flowing with the wheels and all that broke down. Maybe it broke down because there was ice on the road and they slid off the track. Well, this happens mentally and emotionally as well. There was ice on the road. Something dissociated and unbalanced me, and suddenly this wall of emotional energy slides out of control and lands in an intense mass of fixated energy that can't move unless a crane, unless a forklift, unless 30 or 40 guys, each lifting one piece, each lift each 2-ton piece of steel back onto the truck, push the stuck truck back into position, repair the broken mechanics, etc., and the flow begins. The emotions start to grow older again in that segment of the psyche. Because the other thing that's important as a distinction within these rings of ages is of course that within any moment of time there are different domains in consciousness. Like right now, this is a moment in time, and one part of my psyche is looking inward, and another is looking outward. One part of my attention is looking at what I'm afraid of, and another part is looking at what I'm excited to become. One part is looking in the past, one part is looking in the future. And so there are many distinctions within a given time period that are much like a color wheel in the full spectrum of inner personas, attention, possibility, probability, and of course the ego always training its attention on this bit or that bit. Some people dwelling more on the negative, some people dwelling more on the positive, some people focusing on the future more, some on the past, but everyone having all of it going on, everyone having a future, having a past, having painful things happen, having beautiful things happen, just the emphasis being a little bit different for different people, a different hierarchy of emphasis. Generally speaking, the more traumatized an individual, the more the emphasis will be on the negative, because trauma is that which threatens life. And if you've had a lot of life-threatening traumas in the past, then it would be natural in the symmetry of life to expect a lot of life-threatening events in the future. And if you're expecting and needing to navigate them so you stay alive, one will be interested in what could crystallize out of nowhere into a threat that could be the next life-threatening circumstance. So, the negative bias within human consciousness correlates to the degree of trauma within the species, within the culture, within the recent time period of the lifetime, but also it goes back intergenerationally. A culture that has gone through great hardship and privation and starvation and all of that, etc., is going to tend to pass on that fear to several generations. To remind them, you may not be experiencing it now, but we're part of a cycle where every so often the floor just falls out from under and you want to be prepared. Even though you don't see it now, you want to be prepared because we remember that. And if we had been more prepared, half of the family wouldn't have died. And we don't want you to die, so worry about that. Prepare for that calamity. And so in this sense, we might have an easy flow, for example, in mental development. We might have an easy flow, for example, in dry humor. But when it comes to shame and dealing with intense emotions, part of what is going on with us all the time is we are feeling intense emotions. And among those emotions, there is the emotion of shame. If that region on the human psychic color wheel is taboo, is very tied up in the family because all kinds of trauma and problems have come in that domain. So it's avoided and this, that, the other. Then energy can get stuck in that one domain while energy flows forward. It's much like a central delivery system. If we think of the source energy coming in and a shipping container, of source energy arriving. And from the shipping container, of which there may be tens of thousands of headsets, for example, delivered in the shipping container. And to have a free market economy, if those headsets are all going to be distributed, then some go to Africa, and some go here, and some go here, and some go to this little town. And there may be one road on the way to one to one country where half the shipping containers always get lost. There are robbers there. There's mud tracks. There's not enough petrol stations. There's not enough gas refilling. The mechanics aren't there. Whatever you send down that route, with the way that it's constructed, half of the energy gets tied up. It never arrives. Now, did it get lost in bribes? Did it get lost in the mud slides that happened? Did it get lost because one of the drivers was a crook and sold it to people along the way? It's hard to say. But what you can say statistically is this route to travel is pretty good, but every time we ship a product to this location, half of it seems to disappear. And that's called bound up. There's plenty of energy in the soil, but with this pH in this segment, none of the plants get any of it. It's bound up. It's not flowing freely. In terms of water, it's turned into ice. We've got lots of water, but we can't drink anything because it's bound up in a low temperature, or it's bound up in a high temperature. We need water at 10, 15 degrees Celsius or 45 degrees Fahrenheit. We need water at this for drinking, but it's bound up in steam. You can't drink steam. It burns your throat. It's too hot. You can't drink it. Or it's bound up in ice, and it's so cold your tongue freezes to it. Before it can melt, it's bound up. So there's all these different dynamics where certain energy gets bound up in a system. And the thing that I want to talk about is the focus of traumatic abuse. Traumatic abuse. And the mechanism by which children, all of us being children at one point, are locked in to a mechanic of age regression where they cannot grow up emotionally in a certain domain or in all of the domains of their psyche. Someone who is literally permanently regressed in all areas may not be able to function, may be in too much of a panic and anxiety attack. But often it's fine. Like, I can get my job done as long as I don't have an angry boss. As soon as I have an angry boss, it all gets bound up, and I'm 4 years old and I can't cope. I can only let this energy flow if I don't have an angry boss. Or I can only flow if I have multiple lovers. The amount of anxiety and panic about abandonment and being powerless and all of that. If I have then my love can flow. And my love can flow because one way or another, I'm confident in this environment that there'll be someone that I can love and be loved by, someone who likes me, even if 3 of these people just vanish. There's 5 of them. Surely so that belief that I can flow and enjoy my sexuality, my affection, my excitement about the future if I have 5 lovers. But if it's just one or none, I can't breathe emotionally into that domain. Or I can do this in a therapist session where I'm sure that they won't abandon me during the scheduled time, but when someone may take a call at any time, I can't go into this feeling. Or I can go into the water as long as it's this warm, but if it's too cold or too hot, I freeze and I won't move and I just can't engage. So what happens with the mechanics of regression? And so we can see how this hook, whenever it's weighted down here, pivots on this pin and catches an edge. It's caught here. And if this was rattled around or the edge tried to, it would be caught here. There's a barb, so it can't even slide off of this plate. If you think of this as a large steel hook, then you also think, well, okay, well, I've got a body, I've got two arms, I've got consciousness, etc. Why don't I pivot this hook out of the way? And that's exactly what we do a majority of the time. I'm not 3 years old. Yes. I feel like I'm going to die. Yes. Yes. I do feel like a small child. Yes, I'm afraid of being hit. But now I have the police. And now I'm not going to die. And now I have a 6-foot body rather than a 2-foot body. I'm going to pivot the pin that falls into place and hooks there out of the way, because there's no resistance in the environment. There's not a huge weight, because as you can see in this pin dynamic, another way to kind of look at it is if we see the pin here, and you can see that if there isn't a lot of weight, if this pin is 50, 60 pounds or something of steel, then you can lift that and move it out the way. It's a bit of a bother, those memories coming up, the panic of the 3-year-old, the 2-year-old, etc. But you can lift it out of the way and you can slide through to the present time. Just hold it and carefully move it up. It's like, now I'm back in the present. I feel like an adult. I see and I'm responding through my 6-year-old body rather than my 2-year-old memory and my 2-foot tall memory, in which I was a dwarf, surrounded by giants. Now I'm one of the giants. And so in that sense, we can come back to the present time. And a little bit of therapy, a little bit of deep breath, a protocol for lifting the pin and coming back into the present. So we do that a lot of the time. All of us have fearful memories of one kind or another. All of us have little points where we held our breath. But we remember that life went on and we're not stuck in that moment. There's that feeling. We go through the feeling. We let it go. And we let the age go. And we come back to the present adult software, the present operating system. But this does not occur in cases of unresolved trauma, and particularly in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In post-traumatic stress disorder, in intense unresolved trauma, this phenomena does not happen. Now, we keep our ability to lift maybe 100 pounds. We have our body. We have a little hold here on this mechanism. We can lift up 100 pounds. Maybe the mechanism itself weighs 10, 20 pounds. Then there's a certain amount of charge in the past, but we lift this mechanism up through reminders, through deep breaths, through shaking a little bit, let's take a cold shower and come back to the present software. So that the most sophisticated software is making the current day decisions. Obviously, a 4-year-old is incapable of making the right decisions in these situations. Around safety, around who to trust and who not to trust, around how to handle a job negotiation, around whether to stay in a relationship that has some aspect of abuse but also a fair amount of benefit, or whether to leave that relationship. What is the best software, which is the present adult software, suggesting. And it's important to understand this hook dynamic because all decisions are ultimately emotionally based. The addict, for example, does not have any illusions for the most part, particularly after 10 years of destruction and devastation. The addict is not thinking, things seem to work out really well when I molest children. I feel this strange compulsion to do so. Comes up every couple of months, and it's a good system. I just go with the flow, molest a few children, and they're happy. I'm happy. Their parents are happy. The country. I'm paraded through town as a great hero. So I just go with the flow, and good things happen. No, someone who's watched that addiction, because one of the ways you discern an addiction from the present adult operating software is that it's a bad idea on just about every rational metric. Is 10 minutes of hurting some child worth 10 years in prison plus this? Is not an intelligent trade-off. So, and then what's all this with hurting children? Where did that come into being a good idea or something that was attractive? No, it's this strange impulse. It's this strange impulse that it's like, that's not a good idea, but somehow I find myself doing this and this and this and this. Eating food when I'm fat is not a great idea. I don't think there's anyone that says, I could eat another 2 hamburgers, even though I'm not particularly hungry. Maybe I'll lose some weight. Let's see what happens. Eat 2 hamburgers, who knows? It's miracles have happened before. I could lose some weight. No, there's this, when you're in this domain of addiction, you've got your rational mind saying cocaine's a bad idea, sexual abuse, bad idea, eating 3 hamburgers when you're weigh 300 pounds, bad idea. And yet, I know I'm going to do it anyway. Why? Because it seems like a good idea to some emotional age at some point. For example, a frustrated 12-year-old who doesn't understand sex fully and wants, and is tired of being put down because he's a virgin or whatever, just wants to be like one of the older kids and doesn't know anything about sex. And so he's going to figure out, okay, fine, his sister's 8-year-old friend is on hand. Let's get it over with. Come on. Can't be that complicated. The 12-year-old emotionally might think it's a great idea to become sexually mature and one of the older kids to molest an 8-year-old. But present-day software, 30, 40, 50 years, a good idea? No. So there's some emotional age that says, I want to eat and I don't want to feel anything. And there's a part that's saying, yeah, but this doesn't end well. I don't care. I want to eat. And so addiction ties into this point in fixation at an earlier emotional age that is out of sync with the data, that is dissociated in a certain sense, that isn't integrated into the present-day software. And that's why we say it's unresolved, because if it's resolved and integrated, then the learnings from those experiences, etc., and the consciousness that comes from that experience, and you learn a whole new thing. You understand that, sex is not just a physical thing, it's an emotional thing. And so a balance of emotional maturity is part of this. And oh my gosh, and I'm not just going to have one night physical dissociated stands in my adult life, because I learned from 12 years old and the hurt of that young girl and all the stuff that I learned that those 16-year-olds that I was listening to didn't know what they were talking about, because we're in a sexually illiterate culture. So I learned about the limitations of my culture, and I incorporated that. And so now I've got a sophisticated set of software, and I have feelings that are up to date. The feelings are relating to the thoughts in the present moment, not the fixation of something that could never be talked about, and so it got stuck. Something that could never be integrated, so it got stuck. I understand that. The mechanics of regression. And so let's look at this mechanism here. Because as you can see, it's got this plate here. And if you know your mechanics, you know that if the more weight you put onto this, with the leverage of being out several feet, the more it's going to lock in place. And so the more this is going to turn down, if anything, and catch stronger onto this hook. So this is what's happening inside each one of us, inside each other's, when someone is fixated, cannot let go of a certain emotional state of age. Like they can't let go of terror. They're bound up in terror at 4 years old. It's frozen. The body is frozen. You can find people in catatonic states in this. They can't move for a matter of hours. So let's look at the weights. If you see the mechanics of this, meaning if I want to tie up your car and I put some blocks behind the car so that you can't drive. You spin your wheels, you get out, you look, and you say, oh, there's 4 cinder blocks. I can't go forward, I can't go backward. I know that the cinder blocks just weigh a couple of pounds. I'll carry them out to the side, and off I go. But what binds and weights this mechanism to such a point that we can't lift it? What would you do if, for example, I poured concrete 7 days before you wanted to move 2 feet around your car? How would you get that out with your physical body and without a jackhammer and stuff like that? So you're bound up and you can't move. So as weights get put on this mechanism, this swivel pin here, it gets beyond the point where a human being, a single individual, can lift the weight at a single time. And if you don't have the ability to differentiate the weights as they are added and remove them piece by piece, because sometimes it's like it's a ton and you can't lift a ton, but it's a ton of bricks and you can lift off one brick after another. And if you know how to break the brick out of the pack and say, this is this thought and this belief, throw it away. This is this thought and this belief, throw it away. This is this thought and this belief, throw it away. And release the energy that's buried in that matrix of energy. Then you can never lift the ton. The one individual can never lift the ton. But piece by piece, they can lift 10, 20-pound objects all day until the ton is gone. In a matter of hours, if you know what you're doing, it can be lifted. But that is part of the issue. Because in an emotionally and psychologically and traumatically illiterate culture, we do not know what we're doing, which brings up fear of the unknown. And fear of the unknown is interesting because we're a chauvinistic culture, which is that we undervalue and underrepresent as a result of undervaluing the feminine. For example, that's why you will never see a single student in the United States spending a single hour learning the science of feelings. Now, scientifically, this is insane, because a scientist will tell you that every one of their own scientific theories is emotionally based, that the electrical pulses that got them out of bed to come up with the theories of materialist rationalist science were the electrical charges produced by thoughts and feelings. And if those feelings and thoughts didn't fire correctly through the body, then none of the scientific theories would ever have been written. So we wouldn't be a scientific culture. There would be no science. There'd be no language. No one would have developed a vocabulary. There'd be no education. There'd be no money. Because feelings motivate every single human decision in human history. So without feelings, you have no human history. Because if you're not afraid of dying, for example, when you have the first human being born, and a crocodile wanders over and you just say, "Hello, crocodile," and he eats you, and you say, "Oh, that's the end of me. Off I go. I'm now part of a crocodile. Interesting." Well, if there's no fear of the crocodile, there's no self-preservation. There's no game to kind of keep the species alive. So there is no species. And so there's no basis to teach feelings, because there are no feelings, because there's no human beings that have feelings. But since there are human beings predicated on millions and millions and millions of feelings over millions of years, it's kind of bizarre that since science rests on a foundation of feelings, which within the yin-yang, masculine-feminine paradigm, not male and female, but masculine and feminine, yin and yang, within that duality, feelings are feminine. It's kind of bizarre that you would not learn the building blocks of all evolution, of all science, of all culture, and of all survival. The building blocks are feelings that motivate, you see, because the thought provides kind of a direction. But if there's no feeling of desire or fear or love or gratitude, then you don't act. You just say, "That is a good idea. But of course I'm not going to do it because I have no joy about doing good ideas." So I just say, well, that's the way it is. I don't even bother continuing to think because there's no satisfaction in thinking because there's no feeling. So if we understand that the entire reality of the species is predicated, is motivated, is founded on feelings, and we understand that we're surrounded by millions of human beings who have not spent a single formal hour studying the science and biology of feelings, we understand that we're in an insane culture, meaning it's negating, disproportionate to the evidence, a domain from a cult dogma that which is masculine, thoughts and actions and outer world and technology and money and stuff are all more important than the thing that produces all of those, which is feelings. And so you understand why we're in an emotionally illiterate and a traumatically illiterate culture. Well, when you are emotionally and traumatically illiterate, you create a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of painful feelings, and a lot of trauma. Whatever you don't address consciously, you bang into unconsciously, painfully. So you have a lot of trauma in a traumatically illiterate culture. Now, in a traumatically illiterate culture with a lot of trauma, what are you afraid of? Trauma. Why? It is the single biggest painful event that you've experienced over and over and watched your friends dealing with in your whole species' existence. The blacks were almost obliterated and enslaved here. The Native Americans were wiped out here because of these feelings, because of these traumas, because of these unconsciousnesses. I'm terrified of them. I don't want to be killed. So-and-so raped so-and-so because they had feelings. They were feeling helpless and frustrated, and they wanted to dominate something, and so they did, and it created all this trauma, and I'm terrified it will happen again. Well, traumatic illiteracy creates massive amounts of trauma. Massive amounts of trauma creates fear of more trauma. In an emotionally illiterate culture, you don't examine the fear because you're emotionally illiterate. So you react to avoid everything that is unknown, because trauma is not something people consciously choose. Nobody says, I think I'd like to be fired, and then when I feel humiliated about that, I'd like someone to make jokes at my expense. Then I'd like my parents to roll their eyes when I can't pay my bills and tell me what a loser I am. That's great, because then I can take up drinking to numb that pain, and my wife can leave me, and then because she feels guilty about leaving me when I'm in a shock and traumatized state, she can tell all my children what a shit I am, that she didn't leave me because she doesn't want to help me out of trauma or something like that. No, she's left me because I'm a shit. And so now all my children can be asked to decide between a shit that can take care of them, their mother, and a shit who can't take care of them, their father, and they'll pick survival and security. So now I can be completely humiliated alone, not know what to do, and be in an emotional and illiterate state. I think I'd like to do that maybe next Wednesday, perhaps, maybe Thursday, fit it in between a game of tennis. That's what I'd like to do. So no, nobody is setting out and choreographing these traumas. So where are they coming from? They're coming out of the unknown. I didn't see it coming. What can I do? And there's this panic, right? This anxiety and panic. I didn't see it coming. And then what we do is we fixate on known terrain. It's that old thing, what are you looking for? My keys. Did you lose them under the street lamp? No, but it's bright here. I can see clearly here, so I didn't lose them here. No, but I don't want to go out in the dark. I can't see anything in there. And so, why are you staying in this familiar little hub of this cesspool of toxic familiarity where it goes round and round, and the same people betray you? But I know it so well. I know exactly how this one's going to betray me, and I know exactly how they're going to fuck me over here and this, because they've done it so many times. But it's known. It's like, I'm not going to be traumatized by this. I know this person's going to cheat on me. I'm not traumatized by that. I know it. And so-and-so's going to cover it up, and so-and-so's not going to pay their debt on time. It's wonderful. The devil you know. So the more traumatized you are, the more fearful of traumatization you are in the future. The more fearful you are of traumatization in the future, the more afraid you are of what? The unknown. The more afraid you are of the unknown, the more you cling to the known identity, to the known context that produced the trauma. If it didn't produce the trauma, then you wouldn't be highly traumatized. So I'm clinging. So we have fear of the unknown. Now, if you're caught at 4 years old and you're terrified and you don't know how to deal with life, and you're terrified of the unknown, you don't know what will happen when you let go of this hook. And so the fear of the unknown, 100 pounds weight. So now you've got, the 30-pound weight of the little gadget here that you could easily lift off and slide into the present moment. But in this particular terrain where I've never been sued before, so I'm terrified of the unknown because I don't know it. I've got 100 pounds of fear in the unknown. So when I get to that point where I'm at 4 years old. I can't move for it because I'd have to lift 130 pounds to lift the item of this object to do my little ritual, plus the fear of the unknown. Now, part of the fear of the unknown also leads to crystallization and recrystallization of familiar identities. Who am I? I'm the one. Let's see, what did I do when I was in high school? Let's see, I did this, I did this, I did this, and I did this, and people treated me like that. That's the one I am. Okay, thank heavens, because if I'm back in the unknown again, I don't even know who I am. That's terrible. It's like I could be traumatized any moment, and I don't know how to respond because I don't know who I am. So when we're terrified of the unknown, often what we do is we cling to the identities that are most familiar. Now, the identities that are most familiar are the identities that we held the longest, the shapes that we held the longest, the patterns that we expressed the most consistently, and that had the strongest feelings. Feelings help anchor us to where we remember something by the intensity of the feeling. Well, if we were abused at age 4, and we were terrified, and we just hung on to that and I am the one who's terrified, and I am the one who is alone, and I am the one. You see, now there's all this pressure to cling to what is familiar and avoid the unknown. So now we're clinging to a known identity that is a young identity. I don't know what it's like to be an adult confronting a rape perpetrator. Because when I was 4 and someone raped me, I collapsed and I did what I was told, and I lived. And my body said that if I didn't do what I was told, I would be killed. And that's all I know in a cult that doesn't deal with rape and where that was shamed and denied, and I don't know how to deal with that. So there's no adult version of that says, no, I am the one who does martial arts and says you're never going to be raped again. Well, that would be an adult version. But to get to that point, you probably had to talk with some people, and you have probably had to have some of them say, well, martial arts helped, and you'd have to be aware of it. But what if you were in a family? What if you were in a family that was so under-resourced and narcissistic? They often go hand in hand, by the way. The more under-resourced a family is, the more narcissistic it is. Because the more traumatized it is, the more under-resourced, and so the more self-absorbed it is. Trying to survive. So if your parents that are trying to survive, give you the message that every time you have a problem, they go into a rage. I can't deal with you having problems. What do you think you're doing? I'm working 10-hour days. You have problems. Go to school. Get your fucking grades. Stop with this thing. You have problem. I'm trying to keep a roof over our head and da-da-da-da-da. And okay, so you've got lots of emotions that you have not been taught to deal with, that your parents, of course, in an emotionally illiterate culture have not been taught to deal with, and they haven't been taught to deal with shame, and they haven't dealt with the fact that they're a giant and you're a little one and all of this. So you've gotten the message, basically, that if you have a problem, your parents will rage the hell out of you, and you'll have a real problem, which is that your primary providers hate you and are falling apart. That's a real problem for a 6-7-year-old. Having someone stick his dick in your pussy is nothing compared to parents falling apart and stuff. So, oh my gosh, okay, so I've got a problem. I'm not going to tell mom and dad. I'm not going to be yelled at. After being this confused and humiliated and hurt and I don't know where to turn, my body's dissociated, then to go home and be humiliated and shouted, forget it. I know what I'm going to do as a good little girl. I'm going to block the issue. And I'm not going to be a problem. This is not a problem. I'm a mature 6-year-old, 7-year-old, whatever it is. And I can handle this and blah, 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 and da-da-da-da-da. So I'm not going to talk about it. And I'm not going to tell anyone because I don't want to make mom and dad scared and blah, 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 and cause problems. So I'm not going to tell anyone. Okay? That's not going to get any help in an emotionally and sexually and psychologically illiterate culture. And so it's not like you're going to learn, oh, you need to do martial arts. No, you're going to learn that you're going to be hated if you speak up. And so next time anyone attacks you at any point in your life, you had better just Be quiet and keep saying to yourself, I'm not going to be a problem, I'm not going to be a problem, I'm not going to be a problem. And if you don't, you're going to know that you're going to be hated and you're going to die. Okay, well, that's a real serious problem if that's the best software you've got, because no one helped you develop better software. Because you were surrounded by under-resourced, emotionally illiterate grown-ups passing as adults who didn't know how to protect their children because they didn't know how to protect themselves because they're under-resourced. This is a phenomena of shame, of social family shame. The inadequacy of the parents and their resources getting transferred to a 6-year-old, such that a 6-year-old software doesn't develop to understand a better way of dealing with. So there is no better way of dealing with it. All that happens when I get near there is I feel tiny, I feel tiny, and I feel tiny, and anyone can do whatever they want with me, and I will just freeze there. And I won't say anything. And they know it. And they know it. In many ways, the abuser is externalizing this helplessness within themselves. Meaning, there's a part in the abuser that feels that small and helpless and feels enraged at being in that helpless place. And they can't deal with the rage. And their culture can't deal with the rage. And their family system can't deal with the rage. And their spouse and their friends, and no one can deal with that rage. But I can't be this helpless. And when there's no help for that, because the cult has decided to shame, for example, needs. If you're a man in a chauvinistic cult and you have emotional needs, you are shamed. So the very thing you most need is help, but rather than being helped, you get punched in the face by your cult that says, real men don't feel this way. So if you want to be valuable and get out of this helplessness, you can't tell anyone that you're helpless. Well, that's enraging. I want to punish the shit out of this cult, but I can't punish the shit out of these people and these people. The only part that I can punish the shit out of is my own helplessness. And the only part that doesn't know how to defend itself within me is that helplessness. But I feel small again, and I go in there, and I don't want to do that, so I want to do it to someone else. I want to put it out there. I want to do that to someone else. And they can sense the same vibration of helplessness inside. The internalized victim becomes so overwhelmed with terror, pain, and shame that they dissociate, they pass out, so to speak. But the consciousness has to go somewhere. And when there's no support and no integration, it identifies with what? If it can't identify with the pain and helplessness of the victim because it's too painful and too helpless and there's no help, and they'll be shamed if they own it, then they have to identify with something. What's the other polarity? The perpetrator. Now they do perpetrate on themselves. But that builds up and feels toxic. Once it builds up and they need to unload it somewhere, they perpetrate on someone else that is an external reflection of this shaking, terrified energy. That they can feel like, that's not me, that's you. You're the scared one, I'm not. I'm the one making you scared. I'm the one doing whatever I want with your body. I'm the one who's doing whatever I want whenever I want because I am not you. I'm not that fear. I'm not that fear. It's you. It's you. And that's what I'm giving you. I'm giving you my terror and my dissociation. Now that I've given it to you, I want nothing to do with you. You're sick. You're disgusting. You can't defend yourself. The internalized message of the abuser to the self becoming the message to the victim. Well, who do you tell? Do you tell someone who's confident and alive and present and will immediately tell the police? No. You look for someone and you watch the pattern. If I bump into you, do you apologize? You see, we raise people in this state. And so, for example, if you take 100 Americans and you go around and you aggressively kind of knock out all of them, some of them are going to say, what the fuck? And you're going to leave them alone, right? Some of them are going to laugh and play humor, but, move away from you or take strategy. And some are going to get small and they're going to apologize. I'm sorry I got in your way. And you're going to realize, they're a 3-year-old. That's me. That's me in there. I'm 3 years old. I know nothing. And I know how to hurt you because I know how my 3-year-old was hurt. I know exactly, and I know they can't do anything because I can't do anything. You're in that same vibration of freezing. You've got no support. That's exactly how I feel. I'm going to do it to you. And once I've done it to you, I'm going to try and push you away and say, you have nothing to do with me. You have nothing to do with me. I don't own this. I'm not scared myself. No. I'm a confident, powerful, blah, blah, blah. I'm the abuser. Oh my goodness. How do you free up energy? You see, it's very similar to the alkaline acid dynamic. You're an innocent child in a dysfunctional cult, and a grown-up dumps 20 tons of acid on you. That 20 ton of acid binds up all of your energy. You can't grow. It's locked up in the imbalance. So how are you going to grow? If you can't get help to lift the acid off you, you're going to become a perpetrator by throwing that acid onto someone else. You're going to dissipate the toxicity that's been dumped on you. The only trouble is there's a lot of these tailspin dynamics, whereas you dissipate something into a secret environment, like where everyone says that that's bad abuse, and now you're adding self-shame because there's some part of you that knows you're a jerk doing that. And so you get rid of the acidity, but now you've got the jerk dumped on you by the cult. And then, this can become a loop. You get more angry and dump more of that, stuff. You're going to take it. I'm not going to take it anymore. You are. And so it's transferred. But the way that a perpetrator locates a victim, the way that a criminal locates a thief or someone to rape, thief, imprison, embezzle, whatever, is they've received that abuse signal in some way. It's not normal, by the way. It's not normal. It's common in a dissociative, dysfunctional, emotionally illiterate, traumatically illiterate cult. It's common, but it's not normal to want to hurt oneself or other people. Crocodiles don't even do that. Monkeys, it's not very intelligent. So it takes a lot of cult brainwashing, a lot of cult missteps and misguided influence of other people, and ignoring of the underlying natural physics, etc., to do this. But a certain part of the self can't transcend a wound unconsciously unless they give it to someone similar to the way it was given to them. In doing so, there's a kind of release because there's a symmetry. So when someone gives you a disease, you either heal the disease if you are able and have the support to do so, or you give the disease to someone else and it moves on. Or it stays with you and moves on. But, to some extent, like if someone dumps a dump truck load of soot on you and no one helps you deliver it off, where is that soot going to go? How are you going to get out of the pile, in other words, if no one helps you out and says, here's where you put this soot? You're going to shovel it out of the way. You're going to throw some of it on the road. Other people are going to step in it. Energy isn't created or destroyed. So in a cult that does not tell us how to transform emotional toxicity into healing energy, we just shovel it around. We don't actually, we just say, you have some of it, and you have some of it, and I'll take some of it, and I'll throw some secretly over here, and oh good, some little innocent over here will take a good chunk of it because they're being nice. Good, let's carry it away. Here's 50 cents, go get rid of this. Aren't you lucky that you've got a pound of nuclear waste and I've gotten rid of it for 50 cents. And that's what we do as cultures and as governments as well. We ship our garbage overseas, hoping that some poor schmuck will let their entire yard get, or farmland get filled up with 10 feet of plastic just because we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to deal with our garbage. And so we just dump it overseas, and then now what's happening is the Asian countries, for example, where we've been dumping, are giving it back to us, because plastic with a 10, 20, 1,000-year lifespan or whatever doesn't just disappear. Someone's got to do something with it. Now they're giving it back, and that's what that's how toxicity occurs. But if you're afraid of the unknown and you've got an abuse identity that feels familiar, then you're going to add the 20 pounds of weight of the identity with the 100-pound fear of the unknown. And then you've got beliefs. Now, people always create beliefs that are consistent with their experiences. So if you got raped at 6 years old and you understood that you would be shouted at by both parents if you told anyone, so you didn't, there are messages and beliefs that correlate with that type of reality, such as, I'm not worth protecting. How do we know that? Because nobody guarded me. Because nobody thought that I was worth creating a sexual predation-free culture. Like, what would it take to create a culture free of sexual predation? It would take people being sexually literate. It would take people being traumatically literate. It would take people being intergenerationally literate, emotionally literate. Okay, so you got 4 subjects. Exactly how many hours would it take to learn these things as a middle school, as a high school student? 100 hours over the course of a curriculum to understand, okay, you've been abused in this way and this way and this way, and it's likely to continue to your children unless you do this, 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 and this. Let's see how you do, and let's track all the thing in the class, and let's do the data. Exactly how many hours would it take to create a culture free of sexual predation? 100 hours per student? 1,000 hours per student? But whatever it is, 100 hours, 1,000 hours, 500 hours, this cult said, you, 6-year-old who's being raped, are not worth creating a culture free of sexual predation. No, we have in fact done quite the opposite. We've created a culture in which 20% of you or more are going to be sexually abused, one, in which you're not going to know what to do about it, in which we're going to leave you in various states of dysfunction and trauma for the rest of the life and shame you for talking about it. That's the kind of love we have for you. Doesn't sound very loving. Well, the belief is you're not very lovable. Okay, so the beliefs correlate with these experiences, and every child makes it about themselves. Nobody's loving me, I'm not lovable. People are raping me, I deserve to be raped. People are beating me, I deserve to be beaten. People yell at me when I tell them my problems, I don't deserve help with my problems, is the belief. So we create a set of beliefs that will guide us to expect what we have already experienced in a dysfunctional cult. So the beliefs weigh 30 pounds, let's say. The identity of the sexual abuse survivor weighs 20 pounds. The fear of the unknown, let's say, weighs 100 pounds. We're now up to 150 pounds, plus the 20 pounds, we're now up to 170 pounds. How long can you lift a psychological mechanism you've received no training in lifting? 170 pounds. And that's just getting to here. Well, next we have 100 pounds of abuse contracts. Now, particularly with abuse in the family, and most abuse happens within the family, with abuse in the family, you have abuse contracts. For example, the older sibling who is feeling helpless at being able to prevent dad's humiliation and violation and abuse. The older sibling can't get rid of it by giving it back to dad, because if he does, he gets punished. So he gives it to little Johnny, his younger brother. And whenever mom and dad are out, he kicks little Johnny until he feels helpless. He puts a pillow over his face and says, if you scream, I will murder you and I'll kill your cat. And mom and dad will never be able to see it because I'm going to kill the cat in a way that they can't tell. You understand? I'm going to kill your fucking cat. Now, if you stay quiet, I'm just going to kick you a few more times. And then you can go. Because I will have terrified you. I will have made you feel like shit. I will have humiliated you. And I will have made you cooperate with me. Because that's the way I feel with that fuckhead of a dad. And I can't say anything or he'll kick me again. He'll humiliate me again. He won't let me use the car. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, you got that, little Johnny? Okay, kick, kick, kick. What's the abuse contract? You can't tell anyone, or the cat is dead. You're a shit. If you tell anyone, I'm going to kill you. Okay, so that's the contract. The contract is, you can be my little brother. I will kick you, smother you, and threaten you. You will say nothing. You will be silent. And you will live and your cat will live. Okay, that's the abuse contract. Now, why didn't the abuse contract get talked about? Because little Johnny didn't want to fucking die. Because he didn't want his cat killed. Because he felt pity for the abuse the older brother was getting from his father. The older brother was shielding little Johnny from the direct father abuse. You know, and the older brother's venting and angry about that. You little shit. Dad never kicks you. Dad doesn't do that. You do. You're just a da-da-da-da-da. So little Johnny understands that his job is to be kicked and shut up about it. Okay? That never got dealt with. He's 5 years old. He's in trauma, being kicked and helpless. He's terrified. His brother could kill him at any time. He's a giant. Little Johnny's a 5-year-old. So he has an abuse contract that says that if you threaten me and you kick me and do this and this and this, I've got to stay silent or I will die. Now he's 45 years old. Someone's bullying him a little bit at work. It rings a bell in his body and his memory that says, we're in that terrain where if you speak out, you will die. So he goes silent, gets small. This emboldens the abuser. Oh, good. I wasn't quite sure if you'd defend yourself or not, but now that you're capitulating, yes, that, good, we'll kick you some more. I'm very frustrated. I need someone to kick. I can't kick the boss. I'll lose my job. I'll kick you, my coworker. I can't physically kick you, probably, but I can sure kick the shit out of you in the water cooler area, make you feel shitty and small, and undermine you, and tell you how great you are to your face, and do this behind closed doors, and tell your boss what a shit you are, and blame my mistakes on you, and I can do all that, and I will take great satisfaction in your helplessness and your smallness, because that's how I feel, and I don't know what to do with that helplessness and this fucked up, emotionally illiterate, dysfunctional culture that has to pretend to be so politically correct while being so divisive and toxic. It's unbelievably insane. So the abuse contract adds 100 pounds because you can't get rid of the abuse. So now you're taking it on and abusing yourself by staying silent. Now the fear of abandonment. You see, little Johnny at age 4, age 5, he needed survival and security, love and belonging by all the giants. His 15-year-old brother was a giant. His mom was a giant. His dad was a giant. They have all kinds of crazy rules. When dad's frustrated, he doesn't want to hear that I have any problems because then he'll attack me because he feels guilty that he's under-resourced and he doesn't want to admit his own inadequacy. So if I have a problem when dad is inadequate, he will beat me for pointing out his inadequacy. He won't apologize and say, look, I'm really sorry. I'm a dysfunctional parent in a dysfunctional culture that doesn't know any of this. The best I can say is this isn't much better or worse than what happened when I was a kid, and fuck it if I'm going to feel terrible because you da-da-da-da-da-da. So, beat the shit out of you. And And the deepest terror of abandonment for every child is, I will not have love and belonging. I will not have protection of the giants. They will not give me the security of survival. I will not survive. I will die. So fear of abandonment, if I turn this pivot up and break the abuse contract, I will not be welcome in the home anymore. That's 120 pounds, maybe 200, maybe 300 pounds of weight right there. And you see, the irony is, it's not being held. You can lift as an adult, let's say 200 pounds. Well, we're above your adult weight already. You can't lift this, particularly not knowing what you're doing. But the problem is, you're not the one lifting it. You're emotionally regressed to 4 and 5 years old, and they can only lift 30 pounds. They can barely lift the mechanism, let alone go against the beliefs. The beliefs say the reality is like this. I'm a bad person. That goes against that. They said it was like this. If I do that, I'm a bad person. If I'm a bad person, I won't be loved. I won't meet my need to survive, feel secure, because I'm dependent on other people to like me. And they won't like me if I do this. They will like me if they can beat me. My brother will like me if he can beat me, and then I don't tell anyone. And then he can beat me some more. And then he'll be nice to me sometimes, because I let him vent out his hatred at himself. And I didn't tell on him. I stood up for him. So maybe he'll be nice to me and then beat me, nice to me and then beat me, nice to me and then beat me, which is better than beat me and kill me, beat me and kill me. So we're making progress. So fear of abandonment. Now, what's going on in all of this is a series of messages. And the messages come from impact. The messages of being physically hurt are messages that you're not worth protecting, that your feelings aren't worth protecting, and your body is not worth protecting. That's a message, and it comes in hard with every punch, with every kick. Now, when there are witnesses that understand that this is going on, you see, none of your classmates have any doubt that your brother is sadistic. They don't have any doubt, because kids have to survive. They can't lie and pretend. So they know the parents that are fucked. They know more than the parents know, because they can't afford to lie the way a grown-up can. A grown-up can say, "Oh, you boys, aren't you nice?" And the grown-up can turn away from the beatings and the bruising and the fearful eyes, because they don't want to deal with that, because it's more on their plate that they feel under-resourced about. And so the parent can lie and have no consequence of that, because if the parent lies and says, "Oh, the older brother is just doing a few things, it's no big deal, and the younger one will grow out of it," you see, now the parent is off the hook from doing anything that they don't know how to do, or don't have the time to do, or don't have the money for the therapy, or da-da-da-da-da. So they're off the hook. Now, having bought themselves a nice vacation in delusion, the little boy gets the message from the tightening of eyes. The parent says, "Who'd like to say something?" And of course, what they're really saying is, "Who'd like to tell me what a great parent I am and how wonderful their life is?" And they say, "Well, I'm a little bit," and the eyes tighten. And the kid goes, "If I tell the truth about how I'm being fucked over by my older brother, da-da-da, my parent will hate me for ruining his delusion." Because what's giving him a nice feeling that he's a great parent is the delusion that nothing's going on. So he's willfully ignoring all of this because he's under-resourced. He's willfully ignoring all this because he's under-resourced. And so he's not dealing with it. But if I puncture the delusion, he will hate me for pointing out his inadequacy, his lack of resource, because he's gotten through some rotten problem. He's just managed to get a bonus or something, and he needs to be celebrated and da-da-da-da-da. But if he understands that while he was off getting his bonus, two of his youngest children have been raped and bullied and da-da-da-da-da, and that he doesn't know what to do about it. And if he flies off the handle and half kills the older brother, and the other older brother has revenge for the rest of his life on the younger kid that ruined him with his dad and da-da-da-da-da, and this is way beyond the ability of a 5, 10, 6, 7, 8-year-old to process. So he just guides by the tightening of the eyes. He knows that's dangerous terrain. Every time he keeps telling the truth, when those eyes look like that, something explodes, and it's traumatic, and he doesn't know how to deal with it, and he's punished, and he's all alone, and he's screaming. He's screaming, and no one responds. People hate him for puncturing the delusion vacation. So, fear of abandonment, messages of impact. Your truth is not worth my good feeling. That's an obvious message. If every time I tell the truth, I feel bad and I hate you for it, your truth is not worth my good feeling. Your feelings are not as valuable as my delusion. Your safety is not as valuable as my good feeling. You start to see how narcissism propagates through the generations. Because, of course, if my feelings don't matter at all, only the abuser's feelings matter. Then when I become the abuser, my feelings matter as the abuser, and the victim's feelings don't matter. So we have the messages which can weigh 200 pounds. Because these are not just messages that come from one person. Being a psychologically and emotionally and traumatically illiterate culture, we are not aware of exactly how hard we have to work to not see what is right in front of our faces by body language that animals know better than we do. There are dogs that can read the vibe of a human being better than many parents. Do you know how hard a human brain has to work to shut down and tune out what a dog can see? It's intense, the level of willful ignorance. And so that level of willful ignorance comes with a message. Because the child, particularly a young infant, often can still see things. They may not fully have language, but they can still see things. And they observe the ubiquitousness, the unanimous willful ignorance of the grown-ups around them. They see that parent is threatening. And then they see teacher after teacher at school coming up to that parent and willfully overlooking the threat in that parent's eyes. Hi, nice to see you. It's like, why is no one responding to the threat? And there's a message. The 6-year-old is not worth protecting. The delusions and safety feelings of the teacher that abuse will not be turned on them is more important than the safety and life of the 6-year-old who's going to go home with that abusive parent and may die, or may be just traumatized and go mildly insane, or may develop a learning disability. Either way, their life will be irrevocably changed because not a single grown-up in the circle was willing to see the obvious and respond to the obvious and fight for the child. The abuser is who matters, is the message. This message goes in deep, and it goes in hundreds of thousands of times, which is why it's so heavy at 200, 300, 400 pounds and counting. Every single time we watch the collusion of the grown-ups to diminish, to deflect, to minimize and whitewash the child's feelings and impact in order to bolster the self-image and the agendas of the giant. We get a deep message that power, that might makes right, is one thing. So then if you are not the strongest one in the room, it doesn't matter how good or beautiful or lovable or anything like that you are. You're vulnerable. You'll be thrown under the bus. It's a huge message of terror and trauma. It undermines the core human need to survive, feel secure, etc., and it reinforces the abuse contract. So if the most innocent person in the room is the most expendable because they don't have violence, the message when an infant is sent back with an abusive and incompetent parent, that everyone knows. You see, when you have addiction, for example, no addict puts any human relationship with themselves or anyone else ahead of their addiction. By its very nature, pain at that level, which has an addictive pain management strategy, is too intense for that human ego to deal with. For an addict to exist means that they've gotten the message throughout their life that their pain didn't matter, that it was theirs to sort out alone, that it was shameful to be painful in pain, so they should hide it, that they're not going to get any help, that their social rank will go down if they need emotional help in a chauvinistic cult that devalues need and shames need, particularly feminine need, the need for feelings, for support around feelings. The need for support around feelings is one of the most shameful taboos in a sociopathic, chauvinistic cult. Well, to gauge the level of chauvinism, you just take 1,000 men, induce them into emotional trauma, and then you go around with them in a social setting where they will be seen and ask them how many of them need help, how many of them need help desperately, how many of them don't know how to deal with the situation, how many of them is that help urgent, and what kind of help do they need emotionally and what are they feeling. In a shame-based culture, the vast majority of those men will look down and lie to the great relief of the shame-based abusive cult around them. They will look down and lie and they'll say, I'm fine, when every single fucking idiot in the room knows they are not fine. And everyone walks away with the lie, knowing that that person is going to be scarred for years, and knowing that the cult has let them down, and knowing that they did nothing to break into the lie. Knowing, in fact, that the shame is so devastating in a chauvinistic cult that the person would rather go through a decade of hell alone, in addiction and get drunk and do this and all that stuff and ruin their life and their family, than admit, I don't know what's going on. I feel overwhelmed. I desperately need help. I need comfort emotionally. I feel terrified. I feel young. I need help. Now, in a cult where 10 out of the 1,000 would say that, what they're actually feeling, well, you've got 1% intelligence, emotional intelligence, and you've got 99% chauvinism and shame. We don't even do the calculations. We call ourselves a scientific cult, but we negate half of reality by negating the feminine in ourselves and in others, which is unscientific. We are so chauvinistic. We go against our economics. You see, our chauvinism damages the economy, just like racism damaged the economy. Can you imagine a cult that deifies light as its highest deity and then goes out of its way to create darkness simply to be prejudiced against a minority. It's incomprehensible. It means that cruelty and the politics of division actually rank higher than one's prime deity. In a capitalist cult that systematically ranks money ahead of the dignity, the survival, the security of human beings, the love and belonging of human beings, that puts money before people, to go out of our way to create and spend money to create 2 sets of bathrooms, one for the coloreds and one for the whites, at great expense. This takes enormous town planning, 2 sets of plumbing things. The amount of money wasted to be bigoted, to be ignorant, to be dumb is enormous. The amount of money that is wasted to be emotionally illiterate is 10 times higher. To be traumatically illiterate, 10 times higher. The stupidity of racism, the stupidity of sexism is a drop in the bucket compared to the stupidity of taking half of reality, that which is yin, that which is feminine, and systematically keeping it unconscious and undervalued in both men and women. It is profoundly unscientific, pathological, idiotic, and costly on a financial basis. It destroys health, family, the economy, the education system, the political system, the military system, and the ability to harmoniously interact with the rest of the world. That is what we give up to hang on to the cult dogma that which is feminine is so unimportant that we sustain emotional illiteracy, traumatic illiteracy, psychological illiteracy, inner numbness and unconsciousness, relational illiteracy, and spiritual illiteracy. It is incredible the cruelty and the willful dogmatic stubbornness with which we hold on to a cult law that flies in the face of science, money, ecology, health, and everything we say we want, and fights it tooth and nail. And when your entire cult is ganging up on you day after day after day to deny the obvious expressions of age regression, to deny the obvious reasons for divorce, mental emotional disease, rupturing of companies, etc., in order to sustain a status quo simply out of fear of the unknown that would not be unknown if we were actually emotionally and traumatically literate, is staggering. The willful malice of a cult and its individuals to attack the soul, to attack the feminine, to attack our future, to attack the species' survival at every level of the cult.